With us now, Senator John Thune, a Republican from South Dakota. Senator Thune, you heard it. Senator DeMint found that language in that never-ending bill of 2,000-plus pages contains a provision for that independent Medicare Advisory Board, the rationing board, right. Says you can't repeal that. What say you?
Well, I think we have to raise points of order, these constitutional issues that keep coming up, Laura. This is what happens when you do backroom deals at the 11th hour. Nobody saw this. I mean, we were presented with this 400-page amendment on Saturday with all these sweetheart deals for specific senators in order to try and buy that elusive 60th vote. And so it becomes, let's make a deal.
But they're focusing on the rationing board. They're the independent Medicare sure. Advisory Board, which sets the reimbursement rates and treatment efficacy, and all that stuff is wound into this one board.
It is.
That is critical to this health care reform bill because it's supposed to do cost containment. They want to prevent any future Congress from repealing that or modifying it. Right. That requires a two-thirds vote in the Senate, according to Senate rules. That's a rule change. Right. Will you and other senators stand up and try to prevent this from happening?
Absolutely. I mean, it's insanity to try and bind a future Congress and say that we can't go back.
It's tyrannical.
This is talking about, reordering, restructuring 1/6 of the American economy. And obviously they're entrusting or empowering this advisory board with all these decisions that are going to be binding. But you can't bind a future Congress. So we will raise points of order, we will do legal challenges, and of course this has a long ways to go. And I think the American people are figuring it out.
Now, Lindsey Graham has raised this issue today where the South Carolina Attorney General looking into a possible equal protection claim and with this payoff to Nebraska for the Medicaid reimbursements. How is that fair to every other state? What is Warner and Webb in Virginia? They're going along with this monstrosity. And what do they get for Virginia? I don't think Virginia gets anything. So, how is that equal protection?
Well, it sounds like there are a lot of Democrat senators who sold out on the cheap here.
Yeah, cheap dates.
But you've got 49 states who are going to be paying now the Medicare share of the state of Nebraska. That's without precedent, too. I mean, this whole thing smells so bad. And that's why I think the American people are really turning on it. But this story has legs. I mean, I think that the health care bill on its own, on the substance, is so bad for the country, so bad for health care delivery, so bad for our economy and jobs. But these latest revelations about these goodies that were wrapped in at the end, I think are just
Santa's black bag of tricks. I mean, he's just doling out the goodies, but they're not his goodies, they're our goodies, our tax dollars. Yeah. Now, there's an internal debate in some Republican circles that say, well, you guys could have gotten more in this bill. If you all engaged, my friend David Frum, other people are saying, look, you all should have been at the table. You were obstructionists. What do you respond to that? We
weren't obstructionists. We would love to have been at the table. They wanted to go on their own on this. And then when you go it alone, which they chose to do, and exclude Republicans from the process, what you end up with at the end of the day is let's make a deal. Because every Democrat then has leverage. They decided to do this with Democrat votes. They wanted to pass it with their 60 Democrats. And if Republicans had been included, there might have been some hope for some common ground. But the problem is there is a big philosophical difference, as you know, in this Congress. There are people who want government-run health care. And we can't go for that. That's where this bill takes
Let's talk about the process here, which I don't usually like to talk about, but it's important here. Is there a way that this thing still can get stopped? I understand there's some move that can be made in the Senate to force this thing right to an immediate vote, no reconciliation, forcing all these Democrats who didn't like that Stupak amendment to grapple with this now. What do you?
Well, I think what's going to happen is there are a number. We're going to raise points of order tomorrow. There's going to be a point of order raised on the constitutionality of the bill, and there's going to be a point of order raised on the disclosure of these 11th hour deals, which also is supposed to be part of our rules. And then, if we get to a final vote in the Senate, but there's a long ways to go because the House and the Senate bills are very different.
Can you forego conference? Can't one senator urge that conference be done away with and you go right to a vote, meaning that this puts the Democrats, the so-called moderate Democrats in the House, under the gun here?
We can object to going to conference. And like I said, I think we will exercise all procedural tools to keep this thing from becoming law.
And how could this go down? The Stupak amendment obviously stands in the House bill. Right. That seems to be a sticking point. Bart Stupak says he has 30 Democrats who will not sign on to any bill that does not include the Stupak language. Could the pro-life issue with the Catholic bishops, every pro-life group against the so-called compromise, could this be a final sticking point?
Well, if they're more principled than their counterparts,
or can they be bought off?
Than their counterparts in the Senate have been, because what you saw in Nebraska was Senator Nelson sold out his pro-life constituency in order to get this special deal that he got. I'm hoping that those House Democrats, those blue dogs,
Stupak and company, are you listening?
Democrats will hold the line on this, because it does open the door to taxpayer-financed abortions, which is something that a majority of Americans, 70% of Americans, oppose.
Not a single pro-life group finds this grand compromise that Ben Nelson sold out so cheaply on. None of them find that to be a real compromise. As you said, there's still health plans in states that pay for, abortion services. They kind of segregate, the premiums. But it's a wash. The whole thing ends up being a wash. And it is an absolute travesty to most Americans that this is all happening. You're all calm and collected all the time, Senator Thune. I've known you for a long time. Yeah. If I were up there, my head would be blowing off my shoulders. How do you remain so calm? And what does it take to get you
there are days
Al Franken and you had the dust up. What was that all about?
Well, that's where when somebody gets up and misrepresents things that you're saying, you got to get out and challenge it. And I think there are a lot of people who feel like their heads are blowing off with all this. But what we're trying to do is everything that we can, procedurally and every other way, to stop this from becoming law, because we think it is an historic mistake for the country. It would be a disaster for healthcare delivery, for our economy, for jobs. And so we're trying to go about it in the natural decorum of the Senate.
Just pat Al Franken on the head next time. He's about 4 feet shorter than you are. Senator Thune, I appreciate it. Merry Christmas. Keep fighting for the American people.